Welcome to the next part. In this stage, I'm going to be building the mast as well as the boom and maybe some other piece. But to start off, these are all the pieces for the mast. They're the half dowels, 4 millimeter half dowels, and they're cut into three sections, mirroring each other on both sides. One of them of 90, 250, and 250 millimeters. And then there's part of the planking from the first planking, which was 1 by 3 millimeters, and they're cut into pieces of 170 at the top and the bottom, and in the middle 250 millimeters. These will be glued in a staggered manner, so therefore providing pretty good rigidity to the mast, and also probably ensuring that it ends up straight. So the structure should end up more or less like this. The trick will be that the 3 millimeter strip has to be against one side, so therefore it will leave a channel on one of the ends where the mast would have a recess for the sail to go up and down. So this I will go ahead and glue in a staggered way, just as the instructions mark. And then when it's all done, it should be a straight piece. So what I've also done is, to give me a little bit of wiggle room, is all these three pieces down here and the three pieces up here, I've cut them 1 millimeter over. So that will give me 1 millimeter on each one of the ends to be able to sand down and square off when it's all done. So I'll start gluing everything together and see how it goes on. Okay, I've gone ahead and glued 4 of the parts, 2 of the side, half round dowel, and strips in the middle. So the way that I'm gluing this, I will glue the third and last final part right here. And I'm doing this with some wood glue, and making sure that it's all straight, and so it won't warp. The way is very similar to when I was putting the second planking on. I just grabbed some wood glue and spread it on the plank, making sure that I don't put on too much so it doesn't seep out. Making it easier to clean. So all I do is run down with a toothpick down the plank and add it on. To cover the entire surface. And that should be enough. By not adding too much, I avoid that it gets too humid and that it bends. And a little bit at the joint. And that should be enough. Once I do that, I try to line up the best I can, and the best option is to put it against the flat surface and pressing it together, trying to make sure that the whole thing is 90 degrees to the surface and pushed against the edge. As carefully as possible. to avoid the glue being ruined, just with a little bit of water. Scrape off this, and now pushing it down and against the previous piece as best as possible. And now going down the line to make sure that it's actually in its correct position, pushing it down, cleaning off the excess glue that seeps out. Even if I did put only a little bit, there is still extra coming out. And by doing it now, I keep a soft surface. And there we go. Looks pretty straight. Just to make sure, I push it down again, making sure that the round dowels are perpendicular to the base, and then I push it down one last time. And also this way. And that gives a pretty straight, flat surface. Making sure that it all matches. And the more I do this, the more I will ensure that it's perfectly flat and straight. So once I've done that, what I do is to press it down with some weights, something heavy, and with a straight edge ruler, the metal ruler, I try to make sure that it's straight, and then add a couple more weights to keep it that way for a while, and that should align the surface perfectly and keep it all straight. And now time to let it dry. I'll wait for about an hour or two, and then I'll add the last strip to the end. It should go right here, and that should keep it all straight. When I've done that, then I can go ahead and add the other semicircle on the other side, which will be staggered in the opposite direction. So when these were 250 millimeters, this will be the 90, and that way everything is staggered and there's a joint every couple of centimeters all throughout the dowel, and I think that should help to keep it all straight. Okay, I've gone ahead and built one half of the mast with the semicircle rods and planking in the middle on one side, and then I added the first two parts on the other side to make the rod oval shaped as the mast should be. The way that I'm adding this, because the peculiarity is that there has to be a groove remaining where the plank is in. Obviously the plank doesn't go all the way through, so there's a groove left in there. So to do this, and to keep it as straight as possible, what I'm doing is, just like in the first step, I'm adding glue all down the plank, not too much, to cover the whole area, and this way I can add the semicircle of the other half on top. I go down the line with a toothpick and wood glue and just smear a thin layer. I don't think much will be needed. To get it all the way down, and just if I put too much, I'm scared that it will start coming out when I press the two sides together, and it'll be very hard to clean out. By putting small amounts, I avoid that. So I just keep down the line until the end. And the last part right here. To join it to the previous part, I just add a little bit of glue at the end there. And once I've done that, I go ahead and grab the piece of plank. This is the 250 millimeters, and just like with the other part, I make sure to join them together, pushing them closed, getting rid of the excess all the way down. There is plenty of excess, even if I didn't add too much, but quite a lot comes out. And that way I can make sure that it cleans out nicely. Once I do that, I make sure to press it against the surface to make sure that it is pushed down and in line with the middle plank. To make sure that the groove is there, what I do is with spare pieces from the first planking, I slide them in between the two parts, so that way I can keep the groove on both sides, making sure that I don't go down too deep because I don't want them to get glued in, but this should keep the structure fairly flat to where it should go. Looking at it visually to make sure that it is straight, and to keep it in its position, what I do is I use a clothespin to press it down and then keep on going down the line, adding more planks, a long one down here, to maintain the spacing. That should keep it. Seems to be fair and straight. Put another clothespin. And then a couple more pieces at the end as well. to keep the spacing out. That should do it. And another longer one right here. And that enables me right at those junctions to add the clothespins. And another one at the end. And now that it's all joined together, it's a matter of looking down the line to see if it's true and straight, and it pretty much is. Except for a small kink, but I guess there's not much that can be done. It's all flush on this side, and obviously this means that there's the 250 millimeter piece here and the 90 over here, and they overlap, plus the midsections mean that there's a connection every 80 centimeters or 90 centimeters down the whole thing. So this is now left to dry for 24 hours to make sure that it's as dry as possible, and keep it this way for when it's all dry for the next step. Thank you for watching, and in the next step I'll start thinking about carving it, sanding it, and adding the holes to make it look like a mast. Okay, the next part of the mast is done. I've done a couple more things. To start off, since the mast is oval and the hole to put it into the ship deck is round, I had to file off with a simple file the sides to make it 6 millimeters all around, and that has worked okay. I've left a gap of 17 millimeters, which is what the plans recommend, and also it tops out at the bottom. What I've also done is mark where all the cross parts go, and made the 1.5 millimeter hole that is required, and trying to make sure that they were straight and perpendicular to the mast, and that way it all fits in. Finally, at the top it asks for a 0.8 millimeter hole to go through, and that's part of the sail in the future. So I've gone ahead and made all those. I've also made a couple of marks to identify the length of the mast, because the next stage will have to be to sand it and to taper from 6 millimeters and 7 millimeters wide here to the top. That should be 3 millimeters times 4 millimeters. So with these marks I'll be able to sand it down and give it that tapered shape. Aside from that, I've also done the cross pieces, which come from a 1.5 millimeter tube, and it's made out of brass, so I cut them to shape, and 3 of them, the shapes come in, but then there is a small one that will protrude from the front, and the instructions didn't give the measurements, but off the plans I measured it, and it should be 2 millimeters. To separate these and to cut them off, what I've actually used is, again, a piece of hard tile, and scoring it with a razor. I just went ahead and scored them like this, and then snapped them off. They snapped off pretty easy. And then with a sanding block, I went ahead and sanded down to the exact length, and it was very easy to sand. So the next stage is now to sand the mast and give it the correct taper, and that'll be the next step. Okay. The next stage is now finished. What I've gone ahead and done is to taper the mast, trying to keep its cylindrical shape from the 5 and 6 millimeter diameter down here to 3 and 4 millimeter diameter at the top. So to do this, what I've done is I've lined out a pattern for it on a piece of paper, and I've set a mark every eighth of the length of the total mast, including the stub, which is down here. And what I did was with the sanding block, I went ahead and sanded down once at each one of the marks, and doing that one time and repeating that. What I went ahead and did is first on the flat side, on the wide sides, and did that 6 times on each one of the sides. Then I turned it and went ahead and for 4.5 sides on each one of the sides where the side mast would come out from. And finally, at an angle of each one of the 4 corners, I did it twice, so that way I ended up with a pretty oval shaped octagon. And finally, with a piece of 400 sandpaper, I went along and sanded off the ridges, and it rounded off pretty nicely. Then after doing that, I took a piece of the scrap piece of first planking and ran it down the slot down the middle to get rid of all the excess, as well as used the cross mast parts to clear out the holes where they will fit in. I also went ahead and drilled out a hole for the front stub of the mast, and cleared out the hole up here for the sail. So all in all, although the result has been that the mast is slightly bowed towards the back, towards the part where the sail will go, I think that when the rigging is added and everything is glued, I'll be able to shift it slightly to put it straight. To make sure that it was actually the correct dimensions, I used a caliper, and using marks every 4th of the way, I made sure that the dimensions were the correct ones, and I marked those right here on the paper as well, and this way it came out pretty okay. So the next stage is to glue on the cross mast and all the eye bolts for the sails, which go down the middle, and on the sides for the rigging. So when I'm done with that, I'll come back and we will see the result, which should be the end of this stage of building the mast. Okay, here's the mast all done and finished. I've added all the eyebolts, the cross pieces of the mast, and a couple of other details to refine it. So the first thing that I did was added the eyebolts. There are a total of 50 of them. They are pretty small, and they're also very long. So according to the instructions, they have to be cut down to be able to fit where they have to go. Although the instructions recommend to cut them down to 7 millimeters, I cut them down much more, because especially at the top, the mast, now that it's sanded, is pretty thin, so the eye bolts couldn't be that long. So once I did that, I cut them all, and I made the little holes all the way down the groove to fit them in, as well as on the sides. One thing to note is that although the plans look to scale, they're actually slightly shorter. So I had to take the measurements. As well, there is one measurement which is wrong. The first eyebolt down the groove starts at 57 millimeters, not at 188. That was a little bit of a mistake. As well as from the plans, I took that the cross piece here is 20 millimeters, although only 18 come out. So using the plans, I did that. To put them in, I drilled the hole, I put them in and stuck them in, and then with a little bit of super glue with a pin, I went ahead and touched the sides to make sure that they stay where they are. And once I did that, I went ahead and added the cross braces, making sure that they were as straight as possible with the rest of the mast. Finally, I went ahead and to make it a little bit better, not in the plans, I filled in the groove at the top and at the bottom because it didn't look very realistic that there was a hole all the way from top to the bottom, since that is where the sail would move in and out. And I had to re-drill the 0.8 hole up here, but there was no problem with that, just with a little hand drill. So with that, it was pretty easy to cut these. Some side cutters were pretty simple and straightforward, and that pretty much took care of everything. The last part is the hinge. I haven't glued it in, but I had to reshape it because the way that it comes is not appropriate to fit in there. It's very long, so I had to cut it down. Unlike an instruction that says to fold over, it doesn't fit in the groove, so I just cut it. And using some pliers, I went ahead and pushed it all into shape. The metal is all very thin, so it's very easy to remold or to cut. So with that in mind, the whole mast is finished, and I will move on to the boom and other little parts. And when I finish the boom, that is when I'll be able to finally glue this down to give it the correct angle as the plans ask. So that will be the next stage, and hopefully it will keep on working nicely.